Very happy to have on my friend Glenn Kirschner, former 30-year federal prosecutor, served in the U.S. Army in JAG Corps. You see him all the time on MSNBC and NBC News as legal analyst. And his YouTube channel, you got to check it out, Justice Matters with Glenn Kirschner. Glenn, welcome, my friend.
Thank you, Dean. Good to be with you.
So we're recording this in the afternoon, so we don't have Judge Engoron's decision. And people are like, where is it? Where is it? Just so it's clear, there's no deadline that it had to be today, right? I mean, it could be Tuesday, it could be next Friday, it could be anytime he wants it to be. He's a judge.
Yeah, there's a saying, Dean, it's good to be the judge. You don't have to set deadlines for yourself. And let's face it, there was a considerable development when Alan Weisselberg, we learned, lied at the trial over which Judge Engoron was presiding. Here is the challenge for him. He may have had a draft ruling all in place, but then he has to go back and he has to see, okay, well, what might I have relied on in Alan Weisselberg's testimony to reach my conclusions? And are they impacted by the fact that Weisselberg may have committed perjury? I mean, these are consequential issues that you as the judge need to work through before you go final on your ruling.
And this ruling, do you expect it to be a very long? I mean, it was a very dense ruling on just the one issue by Judge Engoron earlier before we actually had the trial. This could be a 100-page ruling. Really wonky, legally dense for people like it's not going to be fun reading. I can tell you that.
No,
the average person's not going to be fun.
It's not going to be like a Jack Smith pleading where it's just let's get him. Come on, let's do it. It's going to be dense. There are still 6 counts of liability he has to resolve. The big one has already been resolved against Donald Trump. Then he's going to have to probably lay out some of his calculations, how he got to the numbers. If it's, I don't know, 200 million, 300 million, 400 million, who knows? But whatever it is, I think my favorite part of it will be seeing whether Donald Trump can find an appeal bond to actually appeal this. That, I don't know that he has put up $83.3 million yet to try to appeal the E. Jean Carroll 2. We know he managed to scrape together $5 million, actually, I think $5.4 million with interest to give to the court to hold in escrow to appeal E. Jean Carroll 1. I don't know how liquid this guy is, but I think things are going to get very real very fast.
An interesting point you raise about the idea of an appeal bond. In those cases, it was a jury verdict against Donald Trump. If this case is more of a fine, it's more of a punitive matter. Does he have to then pay the same way, or does it essentially get stayed while he appeals next to the appellate division here in New York, and then ultimately, if he can, to the New York Court of Appeals? That's our top court, the Court of Appeals.
Yeah, Dean, first of all, you probably know more about civil litigation than I do, but I don't know if a fine or a penalty is the same as disgorgement. I mean, he's going to be ordered to pay back some of the ill-gotten gains, which it's kind of like a fine, but not exactly. So to answer your question directly, I'm not entirely sure if he has to put up an appeal bond to make sure there's a pot of money for him to satisfy the judgment that Judge Engoron might hand down. Those are things that I think civil practitioners who are down in the weeds on those legal issues could probably better answer than me.
I wonder if there's no stay, do they start just seizing assets and selling them? Like, could we buy Trump Tower? It's right here. I can almost see it. Not even kidding. From when I lean out my window, it's just that way. I'm not kidding. Like, it's right over there.
But I mean, just the fumigation expenses alone, you wouldn't want to buy Trump Tower.
All right. I can't afford Trump Tower in any event. So Glenn, in a related matter, also in New York, in Lower Manhattan, is Donald Trump's hush money. The media calls it, I call election fraud, election corruption. That's what Alvin Bragg calls it. It's an election corruption case. Scheduled now, as of yesterday, for March 25th. What's your reaction? Does this seem like a real trial date? And just what's your reaction to us potentially this being the first case?
Yeah, it's a hard trial date. And there's a reason I say that. But I agree with you. This is not a hush money case. It's not a falsifying business records case. He did those things, all of which was motivated by his determination to gain unfair advantage in the 2016 election. This is an election interference case. Go to the motive. What motivated him to pay hush money and then commit crimes to cover it up? He wanted to gain unfair advantage in the election. So this is his first election interference trial. The reason I say it's a firm date, first of all, it was the defense that I think a year ago or more than a year ago proposed this date. as a good date that would fit in well with Donald Trump's campaigning.
Oh.
And Judge Merchan threw that right back in the defense's face. And then at the very end of the hearing, this is the reporting I read, when Donald Trump's lawyer started to say things that sounded a little like a 2 a.m. Donald Trump social media post, he said, "Judge, things like this should never be allowed to happen in the United States." I don't know if what was coming next was, it's a witch hunt, but Judge Merchan shut him down and said, "That's not a legal argument. I'll see you on March 25th.
Wow.
You know what? Judges don't just spit that out unless they are intending for that to be a firm trial date. He's had plenty of time to prepare for trial. The decks are cleared because the Supreme Court has not yet returned Donald Trump's D.C. prosecution to Tanya Chutkan. So this is a convenient open space on Donald Trump's calendar right now. Let's go to trial.
Glenn, I'm going to show you something that's real. I got someone for jury duty here in New York, in Manhattan, for February 27th. I'm going to move it because I get one move. I want to move to March 25th.
You would be an acceptable juror. You're an acceptable juror to the prosecution.
God. It would be to the prosecution. If I was on the jury, I would be. I'd be the poster child for why it was an unfair trial. If they got me in the pool, I'd be like, no.
But Dean, let me ask you this question. Listen, seriously, if you were selected as a juror in this case, could you decide it fairly and impartially based only on the evidence you saw introduced during the course of the trial?
Absolutely. I've said that on the show. People think I'm kidding.
They don't believe us, but we can.
Right. Of course I could. I'm not going to. I would hope the evidence isn't good enough. I hope in the other case they convict him, but I'm not going to vote to convict someone of any crime if it's not beyond a reasonable doubt. And the evidence isn't there. Well, then the prosecutors didn't do their job. And that's what people go, like, what if he's acquitted? That would be unbelievable, a unanimous jury to acquit him. But if that's how bad the case is, that's life. That's how it works.
But if the rule of law is important to you, and I know it is, and it's important to me, it's important all the time in every setting. I don't care if there's a D or an R or an I after your name. It's equally important.
I agree. I'm chatting with Glenn Kirschner. So, Glenn, many people on my show last night discussed it, and I was on Dan Abrams' show last night where he's like, "Do you really want this to be the first case?" I go, "Well, Dan, you might not have noticed. I don't decide the order of the criminal cases, okay? If I had my choice, the January 6th case with Judge Chutkan, that should go first because that was an attack by Donald Trump on our democracy and the guys running to get back into office, I guess from the inside, like the insurrectionists of old, to destroy our system. Does it matter to you that this is first? I mean, I can ask your preference, but are you fine with it? We really have no ability to change this.
Am I more concerned with preserving our democracy and protecting us against Donald Trump than I am about him being held accountable for the crimes he committed in New York? The answer is yes. But I think this is going to result in a conviction. I think the evidence is going to be strong. There's an audio recording with Donald Trump and his then co-conspirator, Michael Cohen, talking about this corrupt scheme, putting it in motion. The evidence is very strong. I believe he'll be convicted. And then the question is what kind of a sentence is imposed. But I'm fine with this being the first case. There's a certain symmetry to it. It's the first case that was indicted. It is the earliest crime in time, back in 2016. It makes some sense for it to go first. So you know what? We just have to start getting him tried, and he's going to fall. He's going to be convicted in case after case after case.
And you already partially answered what I wanted to get to because people were asking, is this case, and I ask you as a former prosecutor, a strong case? When you look at the evidence that we know of, and I went through the statement of facts yesterday on the show, and I went through the indictment again, from what you've seen, conviction?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd bet the full buck on it. $1 is my betting limit. I'm not a high roller, not a gambler, but I would put the full buck on a conviction. And I'm not even that concerned about a mole on the jury. People are always saying, you can't seat a fair and impartial jury to try Donald Trump. They're going to be MAGAs on the jury. Well, there was a self-described MAGA juror in the Paul Manafort case. And we've talked about that story before. And the other thing is, you know, once you place the prospective jurors under oath and they have to answer questions during jury selection, during voir dire, under oath, and they get grilled by the judge and the defense and the prosecutors, that tends to out anybody who's trying to lie or deceive their way onto the jury. I do believe we're going to we're going to impanel a fair and impartial jury in every Donald Trump criminal prosecution. But here's the good news. You get one mole on a jury and that thing hangs 11-1 in favor of conviction. That's the beauty of the retrial. I've done plenty of retrials after the first jury hung. Ordinarily, it goes a little bit better for the prosecution the second time around. Jack Smith will not be shy about bringing a case to a retrial.
Right. And do you have any sense, because I haven't heard this, how long this case, putting aside jury selection, how long this case would actually take to try? It doesn't seem that complex. It's document case.
I think the judge projected it could be 4 to 6 weeks, 6 weeks on the outside.
Wow. I didn't know that.
But here's the thing. Here's the thing, Dean. You never want to tell jurors that we might be able to wrap this up in 3 weeks only to have it go beyond, and so that's why judges will almost always predict for the jury that it's going to go a little longer than it actually ends up going.
Oh, that's interesting. Well put. I'm chatting with our friend Glenn Kirschner. So, and to remind people, we just had a verdict, although it was a civil case in E. Jean Carroll in federal court here in New York, where the jury pool actually went beyond Manhattan. It went to other parts because it's federal court. And a jury unanimously reached the decision based on the evidence that Donald Trump was liable. They already determined liable, but the amount of damages, and they were unanimous. I'm not really concerned. A New York jury, like almost anywhere, I think will convict him. By the way, I wanted to get your take, because the Fani Willis thing, Fulton County DA, it took a whole lot of swings. In the morning, there were people yesterday going, she's going to be disqualified. And now it seems like people are like, no, it's not going to be disqualified at all. Well, what is your take on what you saw?
So first of all, I didn't think Nathan Wade was a particularly compelling witness. I think he kind of stumbled around. And so I think when people, but the thing is, you never assess how emotion might shake out until all of the evidence is in. And highlighting that wisdom was waiting for Fani Willis to testify, because I'll tell you, she was strong and bold and fierce. She was the boss lady in there. You can see why she is well equipped to take down RICO gangs, not just political RICO gangs, but other RICO gangs, and I think after you saw her testify, there's very little question. Now it's still ongoing. There are still some witnesses. I watched much of her father's testimony, which was pretty darn good for the state, for Fani Willis, and for the prospect of this thing really not even registering, not disqualifying her in any way. But when you saw her explain some of the things that Wade said that maybe made you raise an eyebrow, he's like, well, yeah, she just gave me $2,000 in cash because I paid for the cruise tickets. And okay, is there a receipt? Is there a withdrawal slip from an ATM or from a bank? No, well, first of all, I don't know, because it's her money, not mine. But people might be like, well, who carries $2,000 around a cash? And then when she testified, Dean, that my father told me, you always have at least 6 months worth of expenses, of money in a lockbox in your house. And you're darn right. I paid him that $2,000 before we even set foot on that cruise ship to pay him back, because I'm not a kept woman. I mean, she was just so strong and so clear and so fearless and definitive. It's like the few things that I think were open questions after Wade completed his testimony, she just knocked down. And then her pop is on the stand today saying, you're darn right. I told my daughter, you need to keep 6 months worth of expenses in your house. And then he launched into a story about how he was up in Boston for a Harvard fellowship, and a shop owner wouldn't take cash from him. I mean, wouldn't take a credit card from him because he was a black man. So he said, yes, we always have cash. And he said, and I quote, I don't want to make this sound racist, but it's a black thing. This is his testimony today.
I saw that.
And listen, and he talked about all the threats that came in that drove Fani Willis out of her home. She had to live somewhere else. People are threatening to kill her, to kill him, her father, to kill their kid, the grandkids. I mean, this is what she has to contend with. And she still has to justify a relationship with a fellow member of her prosecution team. It is what it is. And Dean, here's what I can tell you from prosecuting cases for 30 years. When the evidence is strong and irrefutable and the defense knows they're going down, they turn and they start attacking the prosecutors to distract from the evidence. That's some of what's going on here. And I think some of it was some legitimate questioning about, well, when did you hire him? When were you in a relationship? And did you financially benefit? I'm fine with having an evidentiary hearing to lay that stuff to rest. but there's no conflict. There's nothing that acts to the prejudice of these defendants in this RICO prosecution.
And that's well put. And, the framing before the hearings was that she hired a guy she was dating and then gave him money and all that. And it turns out she had hired him. They got to know each other better, although they knew each other. And then it was an office romance. It happens, and it's ended since then. And it's really no big deal. And she was very good about, you're trying to put me on trial. They're on trial for trying to overturn our 2020 election. And I think she also said, a man is not a plan, he's a companion. And I'm like, wow, I like that. It's pretty cool. Very good.
I didn't know if she was going to say a man is not a plan. A man is a companion, like a dog. I mean, I was just waiting for,
right.
Because dogs are good companions too,
Sure. Very good. So let's shift gears. Last couple of things, because there's so much law stuff involving Trump world and what's going on. So, this week, Jack Smith's team filed their opposition to Trump's application to the Supreme Court to stay the immunity case, where he can commit all the crimes he wants. SEAL Team 6 can kill his opponents, that kind of stuff. So we're waiting now. They had given Jack Smith's team till Monday or Tuesday. They filed earlier. What do you think in your heart? Do you think they'll do a stay? You think they'll take the case? What do you think happens?
If the Supreme Court justices are honest brokers of the law, big if there's no way they're going to get 5 votes to keep the stay in place. There's just no way. There's contrary authority in the Constitution. The Constitution says, if I can break it down into layman's terms, even if a president is impeached, he can still be prosecuted for the same conduct. How in the heck do you argue that there's absolute presidential immunity anywhere to be found in the Constitution, in any precedent, or in any statute? There's not. So the Supreme Court, I don't think, can find any wiggle room on this one the way they are finding, and looks like they will find in the disqualification litigation. I think they're going to lift the stay. I think they're going to deliver the case back to Judge Chutkan's capable hands. She's going to set a trial date probably for like June. And right when he's done being convicted in New York, he can go ahead and go to trial down in D.C. What do you think? Do you think they're going to keep the stay in place and grant review of this?
I hope not. The opinion was so well written, and that's why I think they took extra time. They don't need to, unless the Supreme Court wants to weigh in on an issue of first impression. But having the D.C. Circuit, that's the law there, where the president is based, it's perfect. We only have 46 presidents in the history of America, right? 45, 46, 46. So having the D.C. controlling, that's the law of the circuit. That's where the president's. You don't need to. So if they deny cert, that's the law. We're done. And
here's a little bit of a procedural outlier, because we know the Supreme Court likes to be the big dog on the block. They might want to write a little something for posterity, even if they agree with the way the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals resolved it. They might have a slightly different rationale they want to lay out in a Supreme Court opinion. Fine. You know what you do? You don't keep the stay in place. You lift the stay, grant review, and then issue an opinion that says we agree with the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals. There's no absolute presidential immunity, and here's the opinion we're writing on it. So that's kind of win-win if they really want to write something.
Right, and that's what I'm hoping. I'm hoping there's no stay whatsoever. Look, to get back to the March 25th case, the election interference case here in New York, Alvin Bragg has said in the past he had no problem with other cases going first. Do you think if there's no stay, and Judge Chutkan goes, we're giving you a new date, and say it's May or June, it's a firm date, you think then Alvin Bragg might be agreeable and even go to the court and say, we have no problem agreeing to the adjournment request of the defendants to put this after that trial?
Yeah, I think he might be agreeable, because think about what happened the first go round. Judge Chutkan said in open court, I was in the court at the time, when she was setting, remember the March 4 trial date that has since been vacated. She said, listen, I understand Judge Marchand has a March 25th trial date set on his calendar for the defendant. I've communicated with Judge Marchand. I told him I was intending to set a March 4 trial date. She stopped there, but the message was clear. Everybody's happy to have the feds take the lead. So I would not be at all surprised if she gets it back. There is no stay granted, and she sets a trial date 3 months down the road, and New York again gets bumped down the road. I think New York would probably be fine with it. Not that I know the personalities of, for example, Judge Marchand. At some point, he's going to say, look, I accommodated you last time. I told the parties March 25th. was firm. Indeed, they suggested that date way back when. I'm going to stick with my trial because the state doesn't have to yield to the feds. It's just that the state generally does yield to the feds.
And I would be ecstatic if that happens because I so want the January 6th case to go first because I know people are going to follow the first case. We won't see it on television, but they'll follow it. And that is the case where it was an attempt to put a dagger in the heart of American democracy and our republic to keep a man in power despite losing. So last two quick things here. Judge Cannon, surprisingly, in the espionage case, I call it the espionage case because he's not charged with classified documents. He's charged with 30 plus counts of violating the Espionage Act. But she did not agree to Trump's attorney's request to delay certain motion deadlines. Is this the rope-a-dope? Is she making us go like, oh, she's trying to be fair? And then like Muhammad Ali turns around the last round and goes, oh, I'm going to put the trial date off. No problem. We'll put it 3 years from now, whatever you want. Or do you think there's a chance that Judge Cannon is going to be just a normal judge and this will go, that the trial date's in May, we're having a trial. It's not a big deal.
Yeah, I'm a boxing guy and a boxing fan. So you warm my heart when you use the rope-a-dope
Right.
reference. So I think it might be a little rope-a-dope, and here's why. Every other call she's made has done a favor, though, for Donald Trump, basically. So here's the date to keep an eye out for, March 1st, because on March 1st, that's when they're going to have the status hearing that will be basically a scheduling conference.
Oh.
And that's when, even though she's made some noises about, well, I'm not going to continue these motions, deadlines, she may still kick the trial date from May 20th. Or maybe not. I mean, maybe she is going to stick with that May 20 trial. I just think she's going to blink, and I think she's going to find a reason to kick it a little bit further down the road. But I think a lot of it is dependent on what the Supreme Court does with the stay and what actually happens in the New York trial. But March 1st, I think we're going to learn a lot more about the May 20th trial date.
And last thing, it's not legal per se, but it involves what we're seeing. We learned today that in Russia, the Putin critic, that was a Freudian slip, I said Trump critic, Putin critic, Alexei Navalny is dead. And we know he was killed by Putin. Putin tried to kill him with poison before. He's done so many things to him. When you hear about this, how concerning is this? I was at your event and Robert De Niro was there and others, and there was sort of a joking thing, not half joking at best. The concerns if Trump gets in, and Elie Mystal is really concerned, and some people are truly concerned that they could end up in political prison if Donald Trump gets in and puts people in as attorney general and as U.S. attorneys who are truly MAGA, which is this in a way will be ending any criticism. And you put a few people in jail. You don't have to put everyone in jail. You put a few in just so others self-censor.
Yeah, I think it's a searing concern that we should all have right now on the heels of Donald Trump saying if NATO countries don't pay their dues, they're not really dues, but I'm going to set that to the side. I think Putin should do whatever the hell he wants to them. That's beyond reckless. That's basically, being complicit with, or at a minimum, emboldening a murderous dictator to go after NATO countries. It's the opposite of everything we stand for, and much of which protects our world as we know it. So, yeah, I think it's deadly serious. I don't know if Donald Trump will issue a statement with Putin killing Navalny saying, oh, that was a very good, powerful move by Putin. He rules with an iron fist. And that's not even a joke. I mean, Who knows what Donald Trump will say about it, but we know who and what Donald Trump is. At some point, I would think some Republican would have to chime in and say, we're not going to let the man destroy the flipping world. It's just that insane. I don't happen to think he's going to get elected. I don't even know that he's going to be the candidate once he's convicted and perhaps imprisoned. I share Elie Mystal's concern that he won't even have to pretend to weaponize the Department of Justice. He'll just find stormtroopers that he will somehow bring into the fold. The good news is we have more Mark Millies than we have Mike Flynn's in the military. That's the good news. But he'll just send stormtroopers out to, corral people he doesn't like, his perceived enemies, and throw them in a gulag. It will come to that. He's told us he'll be a dictator on day one. So, yeah, it's a legitimate concern.
It is. And Donald Trump, since we've gone on, before we came on this and started recording, I have not seen any of him denouncing Putin, and in the fact to remind people, Nikki Haley even reminded people today, he has said things like, Putin's never killed anybody, or I remember him saying to Joe Scarborough, we've killed people too. That kind of idea. The very dangerous man who aspires to be a dictator and tells us that. So, Glenn, thank you, my friend, so much for coming on. It's so much busy stuff with the law. I know you're in demand. I really appreciate your time. Follow Glenn. Check out his YouTube channel, Glenn Justice Matters with Glenn Kirschner. Follow him on X. And I look forward to chatting with you in the future. Have a great weekend.
Great talking to you, Dean.